At some point, while the Soviet animators were making all those terrifying propaganda films, they realized that maybe they would be better off making cartoons for kids. One of the earliest Soviet cartoons without a political message was Mysterious Ring or Fatal Secret, a funny parody of American Western films. It's a short cartoon and the animation is crude, but the action and jokes are non-stop. The creator of the film, Dziga Vertov's colleague Alexander Bushkin, must have been quite the joker, since he labeled the cartoon episode 1 out of 48, but never made a sequel. For whatever reason, history books usually avoid that early cartoon and say that Soviet animation for children began several years later, in 1927. One example is a cartoon called The Ice Rink. It's about a boy who skates on ice, crashes into some fat guy who's trying to impress his girlfriend, and the two have a race. The animation is as basic as it gets. Everyone is like a stick figure. Apparently, back when this cartoon was originally shown, it would have looked like white lines on black background, and not vice versa. Senka the African had better animation, although not by much. Hey, at least this one has actual backgrounds. This film begins with a live-action kid who is reading a book about animals and falls asleep. He becomes a cartoon, travels to Africa with a crocodile, meets a bunch of animals, and almost gets eaten by a cannibal. It's not terrible, as long as you don't ask too many questions, such as, why does a child have a can of sniffing tobacco? Why does Senka greet the giraffe like this? Why did the boy give himself to the cannibals? Where did the crocodile get an airplane? Why did the monkey take off its scalp? Another cartoon which has a very similar structure to Senka the African is One of Many. Here we have a young woman who is obsessed with American cinema so much that she wants to leave for the United States. She falls asleep, turns into a cartoon, and ends up in Hollywood. As the girl travels through the strange land, she comes across all sorts of references to people and characters who are famous at the time, like Charlie Chaplin, Harold Lloyd, Buster Keaton, Gertie the Dinosaur, Tom Mix, D.W. Griffith, and, of course, Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford, who caused a sensation when they visited the USSR in 1926 and inspired this cartoon. Besides all those animators in Moscow, a new studio opened in Leningrad, where Vladislav Tvardovsky made a cartoon called Vintik-Shpintik. The name can be translated as The Little Screw. These creepy, sentient machines at a factory make fun of a tiny screw, so he just gets up and goes home. Of course, the machine realized that they need him, so they actually walk down the street all the way to the adorable miniature house that the screw lives in to apologize. This cartoon has a delicate balance of cute and terrifying, which sort of makes it unique. By this point, the American animation had many recurring characters, and so the animators in the USSR tried something similar. They created characters like Tip Top and Buzilka, which I guess weren't that popular since I can't find any footage or even a picture of them. One character which barely survived is Bratishkin, seen here in The Incident at the Stadium. It's a very short film, but director Alexander Ptushko was really good at mixing live action and stop motion. So, this little dude, Bratishkin, is in a hurry to get to the stadium because he wants to know which team is going to win, the one from Moscow or the one from Ukraine. Yeah, don't we all? Unfortunately, once Bratishkin gets to the stadium, he's knocked out and misses the match. To put it lightly, Bratishkin does not take it well. This is the part when you realize that you've been watching a commercial advertising theater screenings of sport events. Which makes sense since commercials are how the animators made a lot of their income at the time. The Adventures of Munchhausen showed that the Soviet animation was improving, somewhat. The famous compulsive liar described several outrageous exploits, riding his horse up a bell tower, traveling to outer space, having his horse split in half, and growing a tree in the head of a deer. The animation here is actually quite good. It's fast-paced, very smooth, It explores different techniques, and the cartoon is 20 minutes long, which was longer than usual at the time. The animators of Leningrad had a different approach to innovation. The result of their creativity was The Post, a cartoon by Mikhail Tsekhanovsky. The story, based on a children's poem, doesn't make much sense. A boy sent a letter to someone in Leningrad, but that person has already left for Berlin. A mailman in Germany learns that the man went to London, and so on. You get to see mail workers from around the world wasting their time because some kid stuffed a caterpillar in an envelope. The interesting thing about this cartoon is the animation, which is unexpectedly diverse. It switches from basic two-dimensional cutouts to detailed drone animation with unusual angles, probably influenced by avant-garde cinema. At the time, this film was a big hit. It was made as a silent black and white film, but it was soon given a soundtrack and was even colorized by hand, although that version did not survive. Many of the animators from this early era would end up being important filmmakers of Soviet animation. There were even animator families, like the Khodotayev siblings and the Brumberg sisters. The four of them often worked together, making films such as The Samoyed Boy. The story about a young hunter is a good attempt to show the indigenous people of the North in a somewhat realistic manner. The animation here is not particularly sophisticated, but it works well in the context, and the movement of animals and ocean waves is rather detailed. Even in the early sound era, there were very few Soviet cartoons for children worth noting. Tsar Duranday was one of the more ambitious ones. The title character is a tiny, ugly man who wants to marry this large, ugly woman. She'll only marry someone who can pass several trials, and Duranday hires Sila, who is basically a superhero, to pass the trials for him. The cartoon ends with Sila being thrown into a dungeon. The reason for that cheerful ending is the fact that this is only the surviving portion, and the full cartoon would have been much longer. Obviously, some effort went into it, and so it pains me to say that this film is incredibly annoying. Just about every character is unpleasant to look at, and is even more unpleasant to listen to. The Soviet animation industry needed a mega hit, something that would show what it's capable of. Mikhail Tsekhanovsky, the creator of the successful Post, began work on The Tale of the Priest and His Workman Balda, a feature-length adaptation of a classic story. It was a big production, and the famous composer Dmitry Shostakovich wrote an entire suite specifically for the film. Then came trouble. Shostakovich was ostracized as a composer when Stalin disliked his latest opera, and the work on the film stopped. Unfortunately, during the war, a bomb fell on the Leningrad animation studio, and the film was destroyed. Miraculously, a very small fragment of the film survived. And now, I present to you what remains of the greatest accomplishment of the Soviet animation of that time.
Барыня пищит, продам митрополита.
Clearly, something had to be done to revive the Soviet animation, but that is a story for another episode. For today's viewing recommendations, I suggest The Adventures of Munchhausen and The Post, both very creative and very different examples of early Soviet animation. I'm also personally partial to The Little Screw, even if it is a little terrifying. In the next episode, we'll learn how Walt Disney affected the animation in the USSR.